UF fans hate this, so we can just be honest about it. Nope, lost Allie again. It was a good try, but I'll just roll with Will on this, and then we'll get Allie back in just a second. But UF fans not real happy. Will, do they have reason to not be happy, or is it just like they would have been mad with any? To me, it feels like a combo. As an outsider, it's the fact that his name's not Lane Kiffin, and he's a Group of 5 coach that comes in with similar accolades to Billy Napier, who was a Group of 5 coach from the same state. I understand the frustration there. I think Sumrall is a better hire than Lane. I don't think you could convince any Florida fan of that ever, but I understand the frustration.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, I actually talked to Ali about this before. Like, I don't think objectively that Sumrall is that bad of a hire. He's not a great hire, but he's not bad by any means. But because it's not Lane Kiffin, and for this whole coaching, even going back to last year, like Florida was effectively promised Lane Kiffin when you move on. There's obviously that giant letdown. And because it is a Group of 5 guy, or Group of 6 from Louisiana, it feels like it's Billy Napier 2.0. I don't think that's the case. Of course, I didn't think that Napier was going to be a disaster, 4 years ago, but here we are. But I don't think that Sumrall is this total nightmare that it's being made out to be. I just think optically, because of the letdown from being, the favorite to land Lane for so long to then suddenly falling off and having to scramble for Sumrall, it's just a massive letdown for the fans, and it's kind of a slap to the face.
I agree. I think it's the letdown. I don't think it has anything to do with Sumrall personally. I think you could sub Sumrall's name for 5 or 6 other up and coming coaches, and the reaction would be exactly the same. And I think that if he had been on the original list that got leaked out from people that the UAA talks to, beat writers and things like that, if he had been a name that had been floated, last year when we were talking about replacing Napier, I think fans would have felt better about it. It just felt like it felt like a panic pick, so to speak. And it might not end up being a panic pick by any means. And he may end up being our Mike Elko. He may end up being incredibly successful at the University of Florida. And as a Gator fan, I hope he is. I never want to be the person that's on a flight rooting for the pilot to crash. That doesn't do anything for me as a fan, but I would be lying if I said I didn't feel like there was a massive letdown when, all of our biggest boosters who are in the know 99.9% of the time are very confident that we are landing Kiffin. All of the information that we were told from sources that we do trust was that this was going to happen. And so it didn't. And then it felt like a fail in such a spectacular fashion. You watch the meltdowns happening and the infighting from the boosters. You hear the stuff about Scott Strickland basically not following the advice given to him by the headhunting company that he hired, Turnkey. It felt very discombobulated. It felt very botched. And so when you feel, before you even hear Sumrall's name, you feel like this is a circus, this is a disaster, your athletic department is not doing things the way they're supposed to. And then, ta-da, this is the name you're presented with. That's why it feels like a letdown to everybody else. The PR side of this from Florida could not have been managed worse, in my opinion. And unfortunately, the person that will suffer the most from that is Sumrall, because he will be given less grace, less rope from the fan base than he could have been if presented differently by the university.
Okay, so I have 2 kind of follow-up thoughts, questions, comments, whatever. What went wrong with Lane? Did he just, because it felt like the connections were there to where we all were picking UF. And I just think any objective outsider, I didn't think LSU was, now I will rank LSU as a better job than UF. And I've said that for weeks, but I also rank UF ahead of FSU. So that's not just me being a biased homer or hater or whatever. I think I could just objectively say that in college football, but I didn't think they were that much better of a job to where preference wouldn't matter. Right. Florida State's a better job than Georgia Tech, right? So, but that would not be a preference thing, right? Or Florida's a better job than Kentucky, but it's not close to where you're going to go with your preference. So so that's not what LSU and Florida was to me. So where Florida felt like they had the connections, they were almost as good of a job, if not, kind of right on that same path. So where did it go wrong with Lane? And then the follow-up on that, going back to Sumrall, is man, what kind of pressure is he under? Where I don't think Florida fans are going to say, "Oh, well, we went with somebody that wasn't Lane Kiffin, and so now we only need to win 7 or so games next year to be back." And I also wonder, to add on to that, now I've got 3 questions in at once. Will if you were going to promise Lane all this stuff, right, like NIL resources and control of the program and everything else like that, are you going to give Summerall that same thing? Can you even get the donors to give Summerall that same thing? And if you're not investing the same way that you did it with potentially Lane, are you setting Summerall up to fail from the start? So again, to recap the long-winded 5-question thing, what went wrong with Lane? And second, like, what is the realistic thought here for Summerall going forward?
With Lane, I think I have a couple thought processes on there. One, I think Strickland blinked. I think it's stressful to be in a situation where you're not sure if you're the person being picked. I think you're watching other programs make hires, or you know that they're deep in negotiations with other candidates that you may be interested in, and you are panicked that you will be left at the altar with no one to marry. So you decide, you know what, I'm going to pick the cutest girl that's going to say yes to me and not wait for the dream girl who may not pick me anyway. And I honestly think that is what happened. Now, had he not blinked, would it mean that UF would have gotten him? I don't know. But I do know that this narrative that UF has been out of it for a week is not accurate. I do know that as of Saturday, Strickland still had some conversations going on with Lane. So the idea that communication had been cut off for a week is not accurate. But I do think he panicked. And I think that, and I mean, maybe rightfully so. If Summerall was always your number 2, you knew he was about to commit to Auburn. They had a deal in principle in place. And so you think, okay, if I don't get Lane and I don't get Summerall, where am I going to go next from there? They knew that if he left Ole Miss, that then there were somebody that's trying to fill the space there. There was probably word that Kentucky was going to get rid of Stoops. And I mean, I don't put Kentucky and Florida on the same plane, but honestly, had Kentucky opened the day before, Summerall may be there. He's a former player. That's his school. That was, a dream of his at one point. So I think Strickland's not great at this. And and he panicked a tiny bit. And in terms of, are the expectations different? No, but I do think Lane would have retained any bit of the roster that he wanted. He also would have had all the NIL budget in the world, which means he would have been expected to win immediately. I don't think you give a guy $28 million in NIL, which is the number that I heard they were going to give Kiffin annually, and a $14.5 million salary, which he was also going to get, and the largest assistant coaching budget in college football, which he was going to get, and then say you get, 3 or 4 years to win. I think they would have expected to make the playoffs next year, or at the very least year 2. I think with Summerall, the expectations are going to be slightly dictated by how much of the roster can be retained, which is obviously a direct reflection of him and the staff that he hires, but I still think it'll be a part of this equation. But we're in a college football era where winning can happen immediately with the transfer portal. So it will not be a situation like Napier where you got 4 years to see if you can build it from the ground up. The infrastructure is here. There is no need to come in and build a different culture. The roster's great if you can retain it. So I don't know that they were going to expect him to make the playoffs next year. Like, probably would have been the pressure on Kiffin, but they still got to win quickly.
Yeah, I think for Summerall, looking at next year, I just look at their schedule. He's got to win 7 because you have 2 cupcakes, and then you have FSU, Oklahoma, and Ole Miss are both at home. Split those. Then you have South Carolina, Vandy, Kentucky, Missouri, and some other hard games mixed in there. You've got to win 7. Like, you've got to show progress, regardless of what the roster looks like. If you go less than 7, you can get 7 or 8. Then you can kind of show a proof of concept. Like, look, this is winning. We went 4 games last year. Maybe you doubled your win total. Only go 8-4, so you don't go to the playoff, but you can show real growth. That, I think, has to be the expectation because the Florida fans, they're not going to settle for 6-6 again next year with a loss, at Kentucky or a loss South Carolina, because that just feels like you're on a treadmill. You're not making any progress. And if that happens, all the chatter comes back up of like, I cannot believe we hired another non-power coach from Louisiana. We literally got a second Napier. He's got to go win 7 or 8 games, and you can show the progress. You can say, I'm pulling this team up from a 4-win situation. The roster is still there. The talent is still there.
Yeah.
And you got to prove that with Sumrall, with the coordinators that hopefully he hires are great, and with the talent acquisition that you will always kind of have a baseline level of success with at Florida, that him and his staff can get that done.
Yeah.
I wonder, you know what I think, going back to all these coaches, we know what Lane's going to get. And this counts for Auburn. This counts for Ole Miss with Pete Golding. It counts for, Sumrall at UF. These guys were all going to absolutely break the NIL bank if Lane Kiffin picked any of their schools, right? Yeah. Ole Miss needs to give Pete Golding whatever they were going to give Lane. And I actually think they might be the one school that does it, but Florida needs to give Sumrall what they were. And now that might be tough. Again, will the donors really pony up? Because ultimately, like, it is people paying the money, is Gary and the guys going to give the money? But whatever they have available, they can't make these guys fight with one hand tied behind their back. Yeah. And Florida needs, and Auburn needs to do the same thing for Golish. Like, there's going to be some on-the-job training that happens when you go from USF to Auburn. There's going to be some on-the-job training that happens when you go from Tulane to Florida. Like, that's just what it is. I mean, there's going to be some of that for Pete Golding too. And whatever they were willing to invest in Lane or whoever their number one candidate was at any of these schools, they're doing that coach a disservice because the fan base is already upset. Maybe less so Ole Miss. The fan base is already upset. People are already frustrated. You've already kind of shown that you're incompetent from a leadership perspective, from an administrative perspective in some of these places. If they don't give, and now again, you only can give what you end up having. But if they're not giving Sumrall what they would have given Lane, I think Florida is setting themselves up to do this again in 3 years. We'll be talking about it 3 years from tonight. Who are they going to hire in this next cycle? And if they do, I like Sumrall. I think he can be a really good coach. I think he is very well respected. I think he does a lot of things really well. But yeah, if they hold back, then I mean, it'll be have a new AD and a new coach. So maybe that'll make Florida fans happy on everything.
I mean, that would not suck for sure. But, I think it's important for Florida fans to try to give Sumrall a fair shake. I think that you can completely be upset at the administration and feel like this didn't go down the way that it should. And, I'm okay with the angst of that. And I am right there with Gator fans. But I also don't know that at this point, what does it benefit to take that out on Sumrall? Like, do you want to be miserable in your fandom? I don't. I'm like,
and I think that's a pretty small subset of the fan base.
I think so. But
I think
he picked.
They're going to sell out the first 2 games against crappy opponents and be just fine.
And they will. And we picked the guy that wanted us, right? He had the opportunity to go to Auburn. His wife is an Auburn grad. He would have had the opportunity to go to Ole Miss had he not already signed with us. I have it on pretty good accord that he had the opportunity to go to Mississippi State a year ago, passed on that opportunity. He might have been LSU's number 2. Who knows? This is a coach who had options, who felt like Florida was his best option. That's a win for the Gators. This is somebody that wants to be here. I get the Napier comparisons, the Napier 2.0. They have a similar record. They came from the G5 from the state of Louisiana. I get it. We thought we were safe from getting a G5 guy from the state of Louisiana, and here we are. I get that. But I do think his intensity level is different, which was one of our biggest complaints about Napier. I do think he's got that little bit of Kirby Smart psycho in him. And I also appreciate and love that. I don't need anybody that's going to pat somebody on the back after they beat their ass. I want somebody who, ignores the handshake on the way out the door because they're so mad about what just happened on the field. And I do feel like I see that. And I do think he didn't put his head in the sand with the statement that he made this afternoon about knowing that Florida fans want a high octane offense. He put that out on purpose. And that is to show Florida fans that he listens and he sees what they're asking for. Now, let's see who he hires. If he brings his offensive coordinator from Tulane and says like, ta-da, I'm giving you a high octane offense, Florida fans aren't going to be happy. But if he goes out and hires an offensive coordinator that gives you pause, that is like, damn, he is serious. He knows what Florida fans are looking for, I think that that'll help. The biggest hire he can make right now, though, is a badass strength and conditioning coach. That is Napier's first mistake that he made coming to Florida, was bringing a strength and conditioning coach from Louisiana. The best possible thing he could do is go out and poach someone powerful, somebody good, a name we recognize, and get him in the building immediately. I think that would go a long way.